3 months. We've got suit jacket, we've got tie, we've got the pin thing going on. It's aggressive. Ladies and gentlemen, Brad Olsen, senior economist at Infometrics. Economics put simply. How are you, mate?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
So, are you at work now, or are you actually? Is this actually at home and you've dressed up, but you got no pants on? What's going on? What's
No,
the
no,
deal?
this is at work, and I do in fact have pants on. Funnily enough, you're not the first person to ask that on a video call, so I do make sure I get fully dressed for
It's
everything nowadays.
just in case it gets sense checked. I get it. So, you're very you've got a quite a fresh face to be doing this economic stuff. Why are you so young and in such a powerful position? You must be very smart. What's your deal?
Oh, look, I think I've just sort of given it a go, and people have taken a chance on me, and that's come through really quite quickly. I've had the opportunities to go wide, and I think the big thing is that, as a young person living through something even like COVID-19, people are looking for something understandable. They want to understand what is actually happening and what that means for people on the ground. And I think my upbringing sort of lends itself a little bit more towards that. Generally, economists are one, very downbeat, and two, talk in very big words, and I want to try and avoid that.
Yep, I can relate. And easy is good for me. I have a small brain. That helps a lot. Failed maths at high school, so this is great start. You come not only highly recommended by a couple of people, but one in particular who I trust, and I'm not going to say what they said. They said one of my favorite economics to listen to because he talks about money stuff in plain language and also community and collective sense, which I value. So that I mess with that. Do you actually find it's a huge asset for you with brand Brad in some way when you just simplify? This is why I said to a friend of mine, Holly Bennett, who we both know, I was like, man, just dumbing shit down for the masses is not doing a disservice. You're actually helping them. And I've been learning, and when she does it with me, and I think it's the flipping great thing, just simplifying shit because it can get super tech and super just a lot. So, I mean, do you find that it's actually become a bit of an asset for you and your business by just simplifying it for the masses to get, cut through for the mainstream?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I don't even think it's dumbing it down. Actually, if you don't let people understand what you're talking about, you're one, not doing your job right, but two, you're not allowing people to use that information properly. Every time that someone uses the big words and the jargon and makes things more, or harder to understand than otherwise, it just makes everyone's lives more difficult. So, yeah, if we can make it simple, if we can break it down, and also, I guess, relate what we see out there in the economy to what people are experiencing on the ground. Because, I mean, the big point to make here is the economy is not something separate from everything else. The economy is you and me operating, going out and buying stuff. So we're actually part of it. And it's important that people understand those connections.
No, I totally get it. Your probably a couple of things to talk about. We can obviously go into the COVID stuff with the economy and also this budget stuff. What's kept you the most up recently, COVID or the budget?
I think sort of both. To be honest, it's still COVID, and the big one at the moment is just trying to keep a handle on how everything's developing. I mean, here in New Zealand, of course, we had this level 4 lockdown that we went into for 4.5 weeks, 2 weeks at level 3. We're now at level 2, and I guess everyone around the country is trying to understand exactly where the economy is settling out. How much are households willing to spend, and in what areas? How much, I guess, business activity is likely to be happening, who has jobs, who has fewer hours. All those things are, I guess, bubbling to the surface, but because people are trying to find out what that new normal sort of looks like.
Mm. I guarantee you haven't seen the economy do this before in your short 12-year experience so far. Um, when when we first went into lockdown, and you realize what it would do to the economy. Talk me through your headspace of what you thought would happen on that right before we went from three into four. Like, how did you see it play out over the next 2 months? And 2 months later, how right or wrong were you? Like, where did your headspace go? What was your thoughts, and how did it sort of play out from what you thought would happen to what did?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, look, the immediate thought was actually probably a lot more doom and gloom and catastrophe than it needed to be. Just because you're right, we've never done this before. And certainly, as someone who's a bit younger in the economics field, I guess learning your trade during a pandemic, during the worst recession since the Great Depression of the 1930s, is quite a place to be in. And so, my first reaction was, wow, this is, going to cripple the economy. And then I guess just taking a breath, taking a pause and going, look, there's enough stuff that can continue to happen. People will find a way to work from home. And I think immediately I realized that this was going to, one, really hurt. It was going to be a huge hit to the economy. But two, that we would get through it because Kiwis are a pretty resilient bunch and we come up with good ideas quickly. And you saw that the world round, people were operating from their homes in a very short space of time, trying to juggle the kids, if you will, with doing work. I was zooming around on my ironing board. So, it's that sort of thing where actually pretty quickly I was like, look, this is going to be huge, but it's also manageable. And I guess that's the balance I wanted to try and put forward when I was talking to clients, when I was talking to businesses, when I was talking to the media, was that this is going to be an incredible economic hit, but it is sort of, we will get through it.
Yeah, were you we had Ed Hyde on the show, who is the chief customer officer at of Chorus, and talking about, man, if it wasn't for the investment made a decade ago to get all that fiber through, we'd be in way different trouble. So it's sometimes when people get given all this shit a decade later, they're actually the heroes. So, and what I said, like, it's amazing that these publicly listed companies are still trading. These businesses are still in operation, even though no one's in the buildings that has it on. It's quite an amazing feat of technology actually saving the day. Just not in terms of the entire program, but the fact that you could at least keep some sort of wheels in motion where people were still being able to do it. So when it went to zero, how do you see from, okay, only a couple of weeks ago, we're at level 4, now we're 3, now we're at 2, got it. How do you see the wheels start to crank back up on this thing? What's are they doing the right moves, the right plays? How do you see it sort of rolling? Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about the second wave that's going to come out of, obviously, jobs and businesses that don't make it after the dollars dry up, and then there's going to be this next wave of sort of commercial stuff. How do you sort of see it playing out from here in the next couple of months for the New Zealand economy?
Yeah, and that's the big thing. I think we're probably in a bit of a lull, to be honest, and I guess I'm a bit scared that lull becomes something that businesses sort of latch onto. You're right that once we came out of level 3, we had an immediate boost in spending. People were running around town, buying
Haircuts.
their coffees, getting their
Haircuts.
Well, yeah, exactly, and that's the thing. Last week we saw haircuts. I haven't got mine yet. I definitely do need to do that soon.
Neither, mate. Neither.
But it is the big thing where that quite quickly settles down, and we saw that in level 3, where we had this burst of spending, but within a few days, you heard from people who said on the first day there was a massive, lines out the door at Macca's. All of a sudden there was no one at McDonald's at all. That spending activity did sort of soften back a bit. And talking to a lot of businesses, there was that I guess expectation that the lull wouldn't be quite as big. They were still expecting that more people would come through the door, there'd be more money sloshing around. And in my mind, there is this lull that we're entering into, and I fear that businesses might get lulled into this false sense of security that, the economy hasn't gotten quite as bad. In my thinking, we're sort of in the eye of the storm. We are going to see continued job losses. We're going to see continued, business closures over the next wee while. And I guess that's the thing that's keeping me up at night is just when we see that start to come through. But also, look, the big challenge here is that the last, real business shock we've ever had was the GFC back in sort of 2009, and that's everyone's reference point. And I think we've got to remember that took a while to get going, and it also took a while to recover from. Whereas this is a very short, sharp hit. It's immediate. We had this complete plunge in activity, and I think if when we look out over the next 12 months, we're still going to have job losses over that period. We're not sort of going to, I guess, start to track back up. We're probably just going to hold it at a certain level of activity for a while longer, and that's the concern for me, is that we think we're getting back towards recovery when in fact we're just holding our own.
Yeah, it's a good point. When obviously been fortunate enough to have a bunch of friends that are in the mix with all this sort of crazy stuff going on, and we're talking about if you've got a seat at the table, you've been twice as busy than ever, and if you don't, you're doing absolutely nothing. And what's become very clear is the second wave that's coming. There's been a lot of, for those that are doing nothing, that potentially just been on pause, literally just chilling off the grid, whatever, is there's been quite a lot of, I don't know if it's complacency from businesses or naivety from employees, but not realizing what's going to come next because of a business, for argument's sake, a restaurant or whatever stops for 6 weeks trading, and then all of a sudden pops back up, but then all of a sudden you haven't traded for 6 weeks. Then when your cash flow is on you on a couple of days anyway, and when you open back up, you're at 20 to 30% of the revenue. You are not going to have the same type of business, and you're not going to feel that effects until after, obviously, the payments come out from the government, and then the market goes back, and then after that lull happens, the reality is there's going to be a huge drop off again, second dip down. And so, because I've got a couple of friends that have been just employees rolling, sort of saying, "Oh, sweet man, get paid this and that." And I said, "Well, what do you think would happen to your business if it only had 20% of the business that rolled through with it? Do you think it would keep the same stuff?" He's like, "Oh, no, shit, no." I was like, "Okay, so like, let's just talk through this, just like sit pretty simply." And they're like, "Oh, shit." And I was like, "Yeah. So probably come maybe July, there might be some different things happening with you in the business." He was like, "Really?" I was like, "I think so." And maybe it might be quicker, but things are going to be happening and changing. How do you, and that's kind of a bad scenario to look at for a country that even is doing so well in comparison to the world. The other spots in the world, there's so many more places, stuff that are still in lockdown now. Like currently, as we talk, I'm flipping in America at the moment, and we've been on lockdown since March 15th, and they've extended till the end of July or some shit for LA. And people are just, it's a wild west in many respects. How do you think globally, for these other countries, the correlation between economy going up or down based on containing the virus in and out? Because there's going to be different countries have different I guess results from this thing. What do you think the correlation is going to be specifically in different parts of the world based on what happens with COVID to its own economy? Because I'm sure this long tail is going to be spikes all over the show, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, certainly hearing from different places across the world, obviously that contention over whether you lock down, for how long it goes on, all of those sort of factors are things that people look at. But across the world, regardless of whether or not you've had a hard lockdown or not imposed, we still know that people are very fearful to go outdoors. There's, I guess, a much more restrictive environment for spending. If you're a household, you're just so worried about where the economy's going that you are going to sort of be a lot more frugal with your spending. You're going to chuck more cash away in your back pocket for a rainy day. Even if you've still got a job, you don't know if you'll sort of have that job in 6 months' time. You might have to take a pay cut. You might have your hours reduced. All of those elements just create so much uncertainty. And I guess you're right as well that we are very much in a bit of a transition stage. We're still trying to feel where the economy is moving to, what some of the key drivers are, where that new level of activity sits. And I guess that's the thing, is we don't ever bounce back to normal. It's not like within 2 years' time we're in the same position we were pre-COVID. We do emerge into a new normal, and some of those big structural changes are going to be quite massive. For a country like New Zealand, our traders and our exports are critical to our survival as an economy, as a society. And so trying to understand what those changes mean on a global scale is going to affect, who we can sell to and what sort of money we get from international countries. So some massive changes coming through. And again, this is so much wider than any shock we've seen in living memory. The GFC has nothing on it. The 1987 stock crash, again, very, very little on it. We do have to go back to something like the Great Depression, which was just so widespread and I guess catastrophic from an economic point of view, to understand what those resets look like.
In some ways as well, you've probably perfectly positioned as an economist that's almost younger, because even the old dogs haven't seen this happen before. So you're all on an even playing field. And if you've got a fresher set of perspective of the world that we live in now with tech and social media and the way we integrate with technology, you probably have a lot more insights to what potentially could be. So what's the biggest beef that economists are battling about at the moment between the old dogs and the young dogs, like and the young bucks? Is there something that's quite a contentious point that half these guys are like, stuff this, and the other half are like, nah, it's this shit? Like, is there something from what's the beef within economists, within your WhatsApp group chats of like, stuff you, Steve, you don't know shit? What's the thing?
Oh, look, I think there's probably two, and the first one is a little bit generational. Look, in the sense that when I approach this stuff, I've got sort of no preconceptions. I don't think, I'll hark back what sort of challenges we're facing. I've sort of got a bit more of a clean slate. I'm sort of not taking anything for granted. There's nothing that is sort of locked in. So in that mind, I guess I've got a bit of a different view there, because everything is on the table, and you have to get quite imaginative to see what differences are coming through. But look, the big beef at the moment among economists, and look, this has certainly come true with the likes of the budget last week, and we've got sort of the Treasury, the government's chief economic analysts, we've got the Reserve Bank, and we've got some of the private forecasters here in New Zealand who are picking a pretty quick recovery. Within 2 years or so, everything's sweet again. Life is normal. People are back employed. Nothing to see here. And in my mind, I just go, man, if we lose something like 250,000 jobs, or even 150,000 jobs, we just can't recover that quite so quickly. It's much. I guess it's that time scale of recovery that is a thing we're really grappling with at the moment. What does that time scale look like? How long does it take us to establish this new normal? And what sort of damage does that do to the economy? How do we adjust for that? Because if it is something we get over within 2 years, then the policy responses, the amount of money we have to spend and the areas we spend it are quite different. You just sort of truck on like normal. If it's going to take 3 to 5 years for all these jobs to be regained, for all of these other people to find a new place to work, that's going to cause some much wider disruptions, and we're going to have to resource differently for it. People who are out of a job for that long are going to lose some of their skills. It's going to be so much harder to get them back into work. It's going to fragment our communities. We've got to be prepared for that, and that's the big challenge at the moment, is figuring out if this is going to be short and sharp, or if it's going to be a much longer tail. And I expect it's going to be that longer tail. It's just such a we are upending the economy. We've seen some massive changes in New Zealand. Tourism is never going to be the same again, and all of these things compound to make a very, very unfortunate but very long-winded economic upheaval.
Yeah, and it brings another interesting point, right? Because I'm imagining from the for economy side, they will do up budgets based on how long they think this will last, and when cash comes out. Yeah, I hadn't actually thought of that, and I'm sure the money they drop into tourism or events or small business or whatever now, if they think it's going to be 2, is going to be a lot different if it's 2 or 5 years. Well, then it brings into the next point. So one of the things that and I'd be really interested in your take on it, is so you're talking about before, say we lose 200,000 jobs, and if there's nothing else to sort of fill their boots, what do they do? We had Andrew Slater on the show, who is the CEO of Home Care Medical, and he was talking about their team went from, I think, like 400 to they hired 750 staff in 3 weeks or something, and they did it by retraining people that worked at for all the phones and stuff, that people that worked at travel agencies, and they basically used that existing skill set with humans into a different vertical, but using that same skill set. It was quite interesting. Then I was thinking about, okay, well, if New Zealand goes into, we have a big drop off, there's going to be a direct correlation if New Zealand opens again, but it opens up for global business to be able to potentially come here and do a similar type thing if their countries are stopped. Is one of the ways that New Zealand saves itself is by is it to try and become a safe haven for global business to set up shop locally and then use like local talent and people to do? Like, is that something that has legs, makes sense? If it was, how would that work? Does it make sense?
Yeah. Look, it's definitely an option, to consider, and we've already seen a little bit of that coming through. I think Microsoft announcing it wanted to bring a data center to New Zealand, so definitely some big options there. And I guess what you also, you've touched on there is that retraining, and I guess we need to be realistic here that we have a bunch of people who have got some very, very good skills, and actually we don't have to fully retrain them. We don't sort of have to suck all the knowledge out of their head and replace it with something brand new. We just need to tweak it a little bit around the edges. So instead of having everyone go in for, like a 3-year degree to learn a new trade or something, often we could put them in for sort of a 3-month course or so to re-establish their people skills, but for healthcare instead of, like you say, travel. And that quite quickly allows us to, I guess, re-engage those people, rehire them, get them moving again. That gives them cash, that makes sure they can pay the bills for them and their family, much wider spin-offs. And certainly what we've started to hear from overseas is that New Zealand is sort of smashing the curve a lot quicker than other countries, and we are being seen a little bit as that safe haven. If we can attract businesses here, even at a very small scale, that it all helps. It all contributes to us being able to get back on our feet. And I think as well, it's an opportunity for New Zealand companies to possibly expand a bit out into the world and say, look, we're ready to go. We're fired up. We've sort of smashed through this. What services can we offer to you, the globe, as you struggle? If you're in lockdown, if your supply chains are broken, because we're here, we're ready, we're able to bring it. And I think there's a big opportunity there for us to start exporting probably more services overseas as well.
Yes, I was going to ask that. So say if that makes sense, right? But what would the government specifically have to do to act as a magnet for global business to set up shop here if their own countries are still struggling with this? It's a shit show, blah blah, all the rest of it. Like, what would the government have to do to make that happen? Like, what would the move you would do to do that?
I think you'd probably need to have a little bit of even a temporary relaxation on some of our Overseas Investment Act changes, essentially making sure we can get more foreign capital into New Zealand. And if you are a business that is going to relocate some of your operations here, that is possible. At the moment, there's a lot of restrictions, and they are there for good purpose. But I guess, again, a temporary relaxation or a temporary imagination of how those operate for the next, say, 2 years could be beneficial. I think we also probably need to make sure that we're still marketing ourselves, not just to the general public, but actually specifically to businesses. We've got a great team at the likes of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. We've got a fantastic crew as well at NZTE. All of those organisations who are already talking to some of the big organisations and different countries around the world and just saying, look, I hear that you guys are wanting to do a bit of work and are finding it a little bit challenging. Well, we've got some great setup down here in New Zealand if you want to come along. I think it is actually just making people aware that we are not only open for business, but we're willing to embrace it, because there is a difference. We can sort of sit back, in a very passive sense and say, yeah, look, if you want to come, that's fine. We'll love it. And the other one is going out there actively and saying, look, you want to get something going. We've got space to get something going. Come and see us and we can, get something happening.
Yeah, it's going on offense globally because the brand of New Zealand is massive. The halo effect of leadership with Jacinda globally is massive. But then it's how do you make that olive branch or just that offensive play of like, hey, we're ready to go. Let's get up. Let's do something. So if you, we were talking to, I've been thinking about this idea of pre-COVID, after COVID, PC, AC, and when I was talking to Rob Fife about it, he goes, yeah, that's right, but you're missing one bit in the middle. It's pre-COVID, with COVID, after COVID. Now, this with COVID section could last 6 months, 12, 18 months, whatever. When you think about this with New Zealand right now, how would you prioritize the government's where it should put its most energy with COVID and then after COVID, right? Like when it gets to level 1, it's after. Between now and that point, what do you think the biggest levers to pull to try and get New Zealand back as fast as possible would be?
Yeah, so there's some big challenges with that, and we saw that actually in the budget last week. The sort of additional transitionary funding, if you will, with an expanded wage subsidy that keeps more businesses in operation for a while longer. But I think we've got to make a call at some point, put that line in the sand that we can't just support businesses indefinitely. Things will change. Conditions are never going to be the same for some businesses, and so trying to make that judgment call on when we're best to flip from response to recovery is going to be really important. I think what we have done here in New Zealand quite well, particularly with some of the government moves, is keeping the lights on. The base level of momentum in the economy is still moving. We had around about half of the workforce still operating at level 4. We had around about 3/4 working at level 3, and almost everyone's back working now at level 2. So we have sort of kept that momentum going. That means we can springboard going forward. I think the challenge for me as we move forward is understanding what is that new position and how do we set up for it. Essentially, if you are a tourism business, what does the outlook look like in 2 years' time? Is it back to normal? Is it 80% of normal? Is it that you actually have you completely repivot your business from international tourism to domestic only? What are some of those changes? And how do we make sure that businesses are prepared for them? Because at the moment, businesses are just trying to keep their head above water. They're trying, like you mentioned earlier, just trying to keep that cash flow moving and pay their workers, pay their bills, keep a bit of money coming in the door. So I think in the next few months, we sort of have to pop our head up a bit and go, look, what are the surroundings looking like? What is the government doing or not doing? And therefore make some adjustments accordingly. I think the big one will be for businesses, whether or not they see a viable option going forward. Is there going to be the money? Because if Kiwis are not going to be spending as much money on certain areas, those areas just can't continue in the same way. And again, we have to be quite realistic about that adjustment. But you're right, during this with COVID period, there is going to be a much sharper profile of how the economy works. Pre-COVID, obviously in a very good position. A little bit of slower growth already coming through, but by and large, we were working well. Post-COVID, again, massive opportunities as we decide to redevelop the economy. We can start to address some of those longer-term issues that we've always wanted to, but never had the sort of the impetus to. At the moment, though, I think everyone is trying to keep their heads down a bit, and we do need to pop our heads up and just start to scan where that horizon is. That's going to be the challenge in my mind for how businesses might develop through this.
And where do you see the Trans-Tasman bubble popping up? Because obviously everyone's starting to make guesses and bits and pieces, and there's a bunch of different, like maybe let's just park all the health stuff for a second. But from a money side, how big of an impact will it have on either side the second that happens? Like what do you think? And that's going under the guise that there won't be any quarantine on each side. You can literally just fly and go. What if the world gets to that point and New Zealand between the bubble does? What type of impact will that have, and how soon to the economy?
Yeah, look, I think it'll be big, and the point I do want to make though with stuff like this, and we have heard it a lot over the last few weeks, is every time there's an idea like this, everyone sees it as the silver bullet that will cure the economic scourge that is COVID. And I think we need to be really quite realistic about this, that even if we were to have a bubble open tomorrow, we're not going to have just this immediate resurgence of activity again to pre-COVID. And that, in my mind, talking to people is what they expect. They say, yeah, okay, we know the economy's different, but this will be the same again, and that will be the same again. And I challenge that every time. I say, is that actually true? Now, if we look at something like the Trans-Tasman bubble, if it comes in the next few months, that's quite good, because we'll get Aussies who aren't really, they're not able to take a break to Bali or anywhere else. They'll probably come for a ski here in New Zealand. That's something that we offer that's quite a unique and certainly a much cheaper option going forward. But at the same time, if we are opening up our borders to Australians, we're also going to have more Kiwis that go over to Australia as well. So we're taking with one hand and giving with another. So, in general, I think we'll probably still make a bit of money off Aussies who come here to New Zealand, but we do have to be realistic as well that there's a few factors that are going to limit just how effective that is going forward. Now, I'm not saying it's completely useless as an idea, but I am saying don't sort of hold it as the holy grail. Kiwis are not going to have as much money in their back pockets, and if they do, they're not going to be spending it too much on travel. And that's the same for Aussies as well. They are seeing incredible job losses. Again, their unemployment rate has spiked. There is just less money going around, and people are still in that uncertain phase. Now, if we're still seeing, some COVID cases across the world, I would expect that there won't be as much demand for travel. People are just not going to want to hop in a tin can for a few hours with a whole bunch of other humans who might be coughing. At the best of times, people are a bit allergic, if you will, to trying to go on planes with a whole bunch of other people. All of those elements, plus the fact that these airlines that we're talking about have had a huge hemorrhaging of cash. They're going to be charging a higher rate to get people across places. So you've sort of got higher prices, lower demand, a bit more uncertainty and fear. We will get more activity going, but it won't just sort of be that this click boom, everything's fine. We're back to the billions of dollars we normally make from tourism. So look, it would definitely be a good idea, and certainly I guess it would give us a model for how we're able to expand this bubble further. Could we eventually bring in the likes of Singapore or South Korea or Japan as those countries are able to limit their own COVID cases? And I guess when we start to develop that idea, that is when we start to get that international tourism ticking back up again. But I guess just cautioning, it is not the holy grail. It's not this complete, reversal of fortunes where everything is fine and dandy again. There are still going to be a lot of challenges, both on the demand side, but also on that supply side. Are airlines going to be flying the same number of routes? Are they going to be offering the same sort of cost, competitive prices? All of those elements do dictate a little bit where the economic fortunes will fall for people.
Yeah, just even on the Trans-Tasman one, if it depends on the date, because if it happens on July 1st, a bunch of people will come over for skiing in Queenstown. If it happens on October 1st, they won't.
Yep.
And to that other point as well, we might have couple 100,000 going over here, but then instead of locals spending locally in New Zealand, they're going to be spending over there. So yeah, no, that's why you're the economist, mate. That's why you've got the fancy pin. What is that pin? Is that a gold kiwi?
It
What
is
is
a
that?
gold kiwi. Yeah.
That's so baller. That's so dope. Um, what do you think's like? What's your biggest fear for New Zealand right now? Like, obviously, you're a young buck in the game. You're going to be around doing this shit for flipping forever and in the mix. Like, when you look out 20 years from this point, like, what are you most fearful of for your children or your children's children, your future children's children?
I think, to be honest, I'm worried at the moment about our young people here and now, and what that also means for future generations. Look, the numbers that we're seeing come through do show that young people, everyone aged below 30, is wearing or I guess bearing the brunt of this economic catastrophe and chaos that we're currently seeing. Over the last, I think, 2 months, we saw something like nearly a 60% increase in the number of people aged under 30 who needed government support. Now, that was compared to something like 35% for people aged 30 to 64. So young people at the moment are really seeing that job decline. They're sort of the first the last in the door, but the first out from an employment sort of point of view. If you talk to businesses, and look, I've got a number of friends who have lost jobs, who are on reduced hours, all those elements. Young people don't sort of have the same experience, and they're not seen to have the same amount of skills, so they are sort of turfed out quite quickly. Now, my worry is if we do have this very long time frame for recovery, there's a whole bunch of young people who aren't able to get into a job. That they don't have the ability to re-engage in the labour market. They're left sitting at home on government support, and they turn into long-term dependents. Now, that's not going to be true for everyone, but if we do see that sort of thing start to trickle through, I do really start to worry about how we get young people re-engaged in the economy, how we get them to actually support themselves. Now, I say that as well because the government's borrowing, I think it's something like 200 billion plus over the next few years to get us out of this hole. Now, that is absolutely the right move. Don't get me wrong, but it does mean that future generations have to pay that off. That's going to be, myself, my friends, all of my flatmates, and that's going to be us that has to pay off this big burden. That's going to be a huge, huge challenge. And I guess the fear as well that I have is that we don't make the necessary adjustments to allow for a post-COVID environment. I am worried, I guess, that we say, yes, we know the economy will change post-COVID, but everyone just continues down that path of it's all normal, it'll all sort of recover again. If we don't retool the economy, if we don't get people ready for this change, we're going to set ourselves back a long time. Now, that might not be an immediate hit, but it means that over time there are going to be fewer Kiwis in work, they're going to be earning less money, and the fortunes for my kids and grandchildren, that is going to be much more limited. That's the big fear I have. And I say that because if we don't make these adjustments now, they don't filter through for a long time. We're going to have to pay back this debt, and we need to start thinking about some of those, I guess we call them sacred cows, particularly in New Zealand, of how we spend money. The likes of New Zealand Super is a very expensive component of the New Zealand government sort of payment system. Now, do we have to reimagine that? Do we have to think of raising the age? Do we have to think of different ways of taxing to make sure we actually rebuild this pandemic insurance that we've paid out? Because, and this is probably the overarching fear, if we have all of these young people that aren't in work and that can't get back into work, we've loaded up all this debt. And if we don't make a plan to repay it, and we have another disaster, another earthquake, some other natural disaster, a pandemic, a financial crisis, we've already spent our rainy day fund. And if we don't repay it, we're going to get ourselves even further into debt. Our young people are going to suffer even more. And so, the weight of all of this is sort of settling on young people to much of a degree. That's the thing that keeps me up at night.
Way to depress us, bro. Thanks for that, bro. It was a great depressing. No, but you're right though, right? And it's always been the case of whatever we are living in now for young bucks in the mix came from what our parents did and blah blah blah, and you have to live with that. But I think not that you can take any more stoke out of it, but this is something that was forced onto us, onto the world that had never been seen before. Not that you write it off. Not it's like old mate Bob made a bad decision and he stuffed the whole thing. It's actually like, oh, actually the shit happened, and this is a pandemic, this is a global thing, and the whole world And even that's so weird because you're talking about the danger that we're in, and we're open and kind of open for business when so much of the world is still in pause. So in many ways, we're so stuffed, but we're still so blessed. It's a funky sort of tension of, like, like gratitude and frustration and despair. It's a funky one. I always get half depressed and half stoked, like stoked on the future of what it can be, and gutted that like we're in this shit. And
Well, and
then
that's the big thing, if we look at this though, and look, I mean, sure, I turned pretty depressing for a second, but I think we also have to recognize there is a bit of opportunity here, probably again for young people, and that's I guess the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning is that possible optimism. If we look at what's changed in New Zealand when we entered lockdown, everyone had to very quickly pivot towards using online tools and all that, and talking and seeing young people sort of embrace this technology and get going quite fast was, I guess, a mark of confidence for the economy. People were able to find a different way of working, and certainly talking to a lot of young people around the country, I think businesses are starting to give their young employees a little bit more leeway to say, look, if we are in challenging times, if we are seeing a big struggle, have a crack, do something different. We'll give you a bit of, wriggle room, because there is, I guess, not as much of a risk going forward. The risk is already there. The ability for collapse and further chaos is already well established. So finding some other way to do business there's not too much of a risk that comes through. That there is going to be critical for young people as we try and develop out of this, is those people who are nimble, that are ready to take a chance, that are ready to, I guess, watch and adapt, are going to be the people that succeed as we come out of COVID. And that is, I guess, on the flip side of that very depressing expectation for longer term unemployment and some of the big challenges, is that if there's one area I can see us getting out of this better, it is that sort of that innovation, that number 8 wire thinking, and that ability to adapt that we seem to have much better or much more than the rest of the world.
I totally agree, and especially with the different types of, there's going to be different types of leadership out of this. It's going to be offense or defense. Defense, stuff this, scared of the future, whatever. And offense, let's get it up and go. Let's change the way this thing works. Everything's obviously in a cloud now. Everything's a software business. Everything is digital, and how it sort of goes. Before you go, I want to talk about the budget really quickly. Who got pumped and got rolled that should have maybe got more of that? Every people on the streets are like, this is flipping what? Like, why? Who got screwed? From hypothetical, not your exact personal opinion, but from lots of people that you talk to.
Look, I think businesses were the ones that sort of struggled themselves. We saw additional support coming through for employees, and again, a good thing with that wage subsidy extension. We saw some of our key public services get a boost. Education and training, of course, going to be critical for moving forward, as well as the likes of healthcare and some of those areas. But if you talk to a lot of businesses across the country, they were sitting there on Thursday afternoon last week and going, well, what does this change for my actual business? I'm still having to operate with much less money coming in the door. I'm having to still keep my workers on and pay my expensive overheads. I'm having to pay a bit more actually at the moment to actually have all the PPE and the distancing and all those other restrictions that are placed on me. What do I get? What is actually going to ensure that I as a business can survive? And I think that's one of the areas that we didn't see any real action on. There's been talk of rent relief. There's been talk of, getting additional money back into businesses. At the moment, all a business really gets out of the government is either that wage subsidy support, which again only contributes to employee costs, or it can take out a loan. And for a business, if you're sort of loading yourselves up to the eyeballs with debt yourself, and you're going, well, I still don't have the same amount of money coming in. Am I ever going to be able to repay this debt? Or am I going to lose my house that's attached to my business? That's the real struggle. So I think we didn't see anything really firm coming out for businesses. But the other thing, and there is a bit of a balance here, we didn't see a big plan. We had a lot of their foundations being set for the recovery and for the changes we're likely to see in the economy. Again, their education, that is critical. But there wasn't a huge amount of vision for what does the economy look like in 3 years' time? What areas do we want to sort of build forward in or not? And I think, again, if you're a business, you're waiting for that blueprint, you're waiting for an expectation, a signal from the government about whether or not you should invest, whether or not you are going to be in a viable position or not. Those sort of challenges are the big ones for businesses at the moment. And again, if we don't get our businesses going, we are going to see further closures, and that will see sort of more unemployment, a slower return to normal levels of spending. All of those sort of elements are going to hinder our survival. So I think that's the main area of lack of activity from the budget, was a real firm guidance and firm support for businesses themselves.
Yeah, and obviously being an election year, it's pretty simple with where a lot of the they're saying 97% of New Zealand businesses are small business, and with every small business now sitting there like, guys, this isn't helping me. What the fuck? It's actually kind of a dangerous spot to be in. Like if you're, the opposition, it's pretty simple what you sort of go at. But I think that's why we both stay away from the too crazy the politics stuff. I really appreciate your time, man. It's been really good. Good chatting to you. It's rad just the way you simplify, and it's basic shit, but it's awesome, and just to see come through, because as much as it's a challenge for New Zealand right now coming out of it, it's a flippin' massive opportunity when you look at the rest of the world, because they've got the same problems and a lot of them are still shut. So it's like, okay, cool. Well, would you rather be open and dealing with this and have options to go outside and get a coffee and get a haircut and open a business and have someone in there and be able to trade and be able to see someone in person and be able to do a service business? And would you rather that, or be that for stuck in house for another couple of months? And I think people would much rather deal with a commercial challenge right now for the economy than potentially flipping more body bags and flipping hospitals and shit, right? So I think net we're pretty lucky that we can call ourselves Kiwis. I really appreciate the time, Brad. It's been mega. So Infometrics, you've got, I saw on your website as well. I'll give you props as well on the end of your email. You've got a nice little promo to go to. Click here for Infometrics COVID-19 economic insights and response page. Well done. It's got lots of good insights on that. It was very solid. Infometrics.co.nz, senior economist, and really appreciate your time, dude. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate the conversation.
Oh, good banter, mate. Good. You can go to sleep well tonight knowing that you clued up one more dumb Kiwi. So thank you.
Sounds good to me.
Love your work, brother. Talk to you soon.
Cheers. Catch ya.
Cheers, bye. What a legend. How good was that? Smart senior economist, flipping young buck, eh? Rolling there in his flipping blue suit, all suited up. He's the most well dressed. Actually, this might be something to this. He might have been our youngest. Was he one of the youngest? He might have been one of our youngest guests, probably one of the smartest, and the most well dressed. I mean, old people got to step it up, man. People give me shit. Look at Brad; he's on fire. Really interesting, because you always see on both sides, like even with the Tasman thing, would not have thought about the fact that, we'll be saved if, Aussies come here. Simultaneously, a lot of Kiwis go there. That's going to take money out of our economy too, rolling it back up. And I think from a business perspective, for every single small business, Brad's point at the end was definitely right there. It's a big risk where if the employees get hooked up, but not the employers, and the employers have potentially take on more debt. They may not want that debt and be like, stuff this noise and be outies. So, we're about to go into a next, he called it kind of a lull. If you're an employee, don't be naive to what's coming around the corner. If you're an employer, look to repivot with what's going to happen, because he's saying 2 years, and some are saying 2 years, and he's saying 3 to 5. If we're to be in this for the 3 to 5, I think everyone's game plans will potentially change. So I hope you enjoyed that one, team. I definitely learned a lot.